All right, you got to look at this. CBS News 24/7 watching as Hurricane Milton rages towards Florida. Look at that. You see the eye of the storm. You see the outer bands there. Thousands right now under evacuation orders. And this video to our monitors shows us just how massive this storm is. Look at this. This is what hurricane experts call the eye wall right there. And if you can see those flashes there, that's lightning right there in the center of that eye wall. Florida is watching this as Milton hits Mexico. Listen. That's what it sounds like in the night as Milton approaches. And as Jessica just told us, when Milton hits Tampa, it's going to come at night. Strong winds and waves battering Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula there. And so this is what they're dealing with. And it's also kind of a foretelling of how bad it could get for Floridians. So you can see there people are busy helping people right there. Video to our monitors show us the efforts in Fort Myers Beach, where it's all about filling up those sandbags to beat back the storm surge. And then jumping over to St. Petersburg, same work to prepare, but an even more urgent situation. There's debris there everywhere, left over from Hurricane Helene. Governor Ron DeSantis ordering that debris cleared out and fast because once Milton hits, the debris becomes projectiles. Everything you see here is preparation oriented. And then we're talking about Miami as well. North Miami Beach, sandbags, also item number one to keep water out of homes and businesses. In fact, just north of Miami, already they're seeing some flooding on the roads from those outer bands that are hitting Broward County in flood-prone areas. Jess, preparation happening everywhere.
And if you are in one of those evacuation zones, Reed, for example, Tampa Bay, as we head into the coming days, you're going to want to evacuate today. Waiting until tomorrow, it's going to be too late. The National Weather Service agrees with that, and that's what they've been forecasting. Now, the models are showing right now about a 50-mile margin anywhere from northern portions of Tampa all the way into southern portions of Tampa. That's where this hurricane is expected to make landfall as we head into the overnight hours, Wednesday night into early Thursday morning. This has been a monster of a storm. It's been emotional for some forecasters, where it did get up to around 180 miles per hour just yesterday to Category 5. It's teetering with those numbers right now, currently at 150 miles per hour, just 80 miles north of the Yucatan Peninsula, causing devastation throughout those communities right now in these daytime hours. Now, the storm will continue to track off into the northeast around 9 miles per hour, holding it a Category 4 for the time being. Those strong winds continue to impact just the Keys, stretching up into the Tampa Bay area hours before it actually makes landfall into the overnight hours Wednesday night into early Thursday morning. Evacuation orders are in effect right now, and like I mentioned before, if you are under them, this is the time to leave today, not tomorrow. It's going to be too soon to the storm already making its impacts with those outer bands bringing in thunderstorm activity, widespread rain just before the storm surge starts to occur as it makes landfall into those overnight hours. Now, as we take a look at the storm forecasted models, it will hit over Orlando into the early morning hours on Thursday, pushing back offshore just south of Daytona Beach, heading into the early morning hours on Thursday, lasting into the afternoon hours there. Storm surge is the big concern, not only for the Keys, but stretching up along all those shorelines from Boca Grande up into Port Charlotte, past that into the Tampa Bay community. This is the big concern right now. As that eye really starts to center in and we get a really finite forecast of where it's going to hit, those communities, no matter where you are along that shoreline, can see anywhere up to around 12 feet of storm surge. And now I'm going to zoom over into the opposite edge. The east coast of Florida, Edgewater, Daytona Beach, stretching all the way down along those coastline areas into Melbourne. There could also be storm surge in those communities as those winds start to whip in the opposite direction as it moves over Florida. So here's our futurecast wind gust right now, just ahead of the storm, starting to see that offshore flow with about 40 mile per hour winds. It gets up to around 100 mile per hour winds as we head into Longboat Key, just as that eye is offshore. 3:30 in the morning on Thursday. Power outages possible. Power outages expected with this system moving through just as it pushes over communities like Ruskin. That's where we can see the dying down of the winds just as the eye is over those communities, and it gets right back up to 50 mile per hour winds into those early morning hours Thursday. Reed.
All right, thanks, Jess. Well, Florida's governor warning people in Tampa to be prepared. Listen to what he just said moments ago to our CBS partners there.
The Florida Division of Emergency Management is actively addressing storm-related resource requests. We are currently fulfilling close to 1,000 missions to support our local communities. That includes everything from tiger dams and generators to staff support, as well as food and water and tarps. We've also deployed more than 11,000 feet of flood protection systems, and we're prioritizing critical infrastructure like hospitals, wastewater treatment facilities, and electrical infrastructure. We've also done things like generators to support special needs sheltering operations. Of course, Starlink Internet. All counties have access to Starlink Internet devices and can use those as they see fit.
So also listening to the governor's warnings, people who are in Orlando, and that's where we find CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez. You know, Helene, and we're mindful of this, hit that area less than 2 weeks ago. Now here comes Milton out of the Gulf of Mexico. How are people preparing?
Yeah, really a double whammy there. Let me start by telling you this. The reason we're here on this street in downtown Orlando is because we had to check into a hotel where we could safely ride out the storm and broadcast from. That being said, I can tell you that the hotels in this area are all basically sold out. People are coming here with their pets, food, medication. You can imagine the same thing is happening at many of the shelters that have opened up. A lot of the people coming to Orlando are fleeing from the West Coast, where they won't experience the storm surge here. But guess what? They're still going to experience a hurricane, because as we've been forecasting, it could still be a 1, possibly even a 2, as it crawls over the Orlando area, even a hurricane as it reaches the East Coast. I can tell you that SeaWorld, for example, has just announced a closure during the height of the storm. I'd imagine soon you'll be hearing from Disney and Universal. And think about the dynamic there. Think about all the people who aren't from this area, who visit, who may right now be trying to figure out what to do. Should they drive home? Should they fly home? Orlando's International Airport has already said that starting tomorrow they will cease operations until they can safely operate again after the storm. Driving around today, we saw that some gas stations are already running out of fuel. People are buying water, people are buying food. It's a lot going on, but that's what officials want. They want people to evacuate. They want people to prepare.
Well, and you heard the officials in Tampa saying, run from the water, hide from the wind. And where you are in Orlando, people are doing that. They are literally running up the freeway to Orlando, knowing they'll still be caught in a hurricane. That's a powerful picture there to paint. So let's contrast Helene and Milton. Are you seeing any difference in approach? Every time a tragedy hits, we learn, we do better. Are you seeing any changes in how they're approaching this time?
I think from the population perspective, a bigger group of people have decided to leave the West Coast. It was very devastating what happened there during Helene, but you remember that was just getting sideswiped by Helene as it headed north. This is looking to make a direct hit and remain a hurricane as it goes across the entire peninsula, exiting on the East Coast. So I think people are taking this much more seriously, and hearing the official warnings, you would have to essentially do something like that if you're looking to keep yourself safe. As we have said over and over, the biggest killer during these storms is not the wind, as devastating as it might be. It is the water. So the storm surge that's expected on the West Coast, I think that's what's gotten a lot of people's attention.
I want to ask you another question. President Joe Biden, we just let our viewers hear what he had to say moments ago, warning people who own businesses to not price gouge. You just checked into your hotel. Are you seeing any raise in rates for gas or basic supplies or even a hotel room?
Not at this point. The question will be what happens after the storm.
Right.
You know, typically that's when these things are really hard to come by, because the supply chain is broken if you have highways that are flooded and people can't get supplies from A to B. So will the limited supplies after the storm in some areas be the efforts of someone to try to price gouge? That's likely what they will be looking out for. We have heard during these types of disasters that some hotels for local residents actually try to keep prices pretty reasonable because they want people to be able to get out of harm's way. So at this point, I'm not seeing any reports of that, but clearly we still have a long time before the storm gets here where people might try to do that. We'll have to keep an eye on that.
Manuel Bojorquez, thank you so much. Another day of excellent reporting. I think the last time we saw you, you were up to your knees in mud in North Carolina. Thank you so much. All right, so think about this here at home or where you're watching us. People told to get out before Milton makes impact, but getting out by plane, not easy, and in some cases, impossible right now. Tampa International shutting down operations as a precaution. Other airports signaling the same. So if you live in that area, just make sure to stay up to date, minute by minute in some cases, on airline alerts. You just might have to rebook your flight. When we come back, justices on the U.S. Supreme Court considering arguments for and against the regulation of those DIY guns with parts purchased online. They're called ghost guns because some people don't want them to be traceable with serial numbers. That's what justices are considering today. More on that when we come back. Now the latest on Israel's expanding fight against Hezbollah in Lebanon and the grim situation in Gaza. CBS News correspondent Chris Livesay following all the latest developments from Tel Aviv and filed this report.
Well, Hezbollah pelted northern Israel with more than 100 rockets today in the town of Haifa alone. That's in Israel's north, not far from the border with Lebanon, where Israel continues its limited ground incursion and also airstrikes, not just in the south of Lebanon, but also in Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, specifically in the southern Dahia neighborhood, that Hezbollah stronghold. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the Israeli military has announced evacuation orders for civilians in the upper half of northern Gaza. It's a similar tactic to what we've seen recently in places like southern Lebanon, warning civilians to flee before a ground incursion, signaling we might be seeing more of a ground operation in this part of Gaza going after Hamas militants who, while reduced dramatically from their presence a year ago, they still hold approximately 100 Israeli hostages. All this while Israel is preparing a retaliation for last week's attack from Iran, when Iran sent 180 ballistic missiles at Israel. Earlier this week, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations said it's not a question of if, but when and how. Chris Livesay, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
All right, Chris, thank you for that. So here's your headline right now out of the U.S. Supreme Court. Justices right there inside that building are considering whether regulations against ghost guns are appropriate. So those ghost guns are firearms that can be put together DIY style with parts purchased over the internet. The question for justices today, whether the Biden administration went too far placing regulations in a 2022 rule. That rule, through the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, requires gun kit sellers and vendors to treat those parts like commercial firearm sales, complete with serial numbers. Gun rights groups want justices to leave it to Congress to decide if privately made guns should be regulated. Let's jump the map now to Missouri in a case getting national attention. The man accused of shooting a teenager in court again today. Today's issue, whether the trigger man, Andrew Lester, needs a mental evaluation. His attorney believes his client is not fit to stand trial. Lester pled not guilty to first-degree assault and armed criminal action in the shooting of 16-year-old Ralph Yarl. By the way, Yarl survived that shooting. Another day of negotiations between Boeing and its largest union trying to end a weeks-long strike. You can see them right there. Contract talks began yesterday, and although they had been talking all day, the union representing the striking 33,000 West Coast factory workers says barely any movement. We'll be watching that one closely. When we come back, is TikTok addictive by design, especially for its youngest users? Some pretty powerful legal minds from U.S. states teaming up against TikTok. We'll have that story and more after the break. We are watching a major court case against the social media giant responsible for TikTok. More than a dozen states' attorneys general say the platform is addictive, especially for the youngest users. Minutes ago, one of those attorneys held a news conference on her reasons for this. Here's Massachusetts' Andrea Campbell. Listen.
Today we're suing TikTok for designing its platform to be addictive and harmful to young people and deceiving the public about its efforts to keep its platform safe. We allege that such conduct violates state consumer protection laws and has contributed to a mental health crisis among its young users. This is one of the world's largest and most popular social media platforms. Here in Massachusetts, it's used by hundreds of thousands of young people. Virtually every young person in the Commonwealth uses TikTok, and then some. In fact, Massachusetts teen accounts make up 150% of the state's total teen population. That's because many users have more than one account. And the amount of time our teens spend on the platform is remarkable. Teens report using TikTok for hours a day, often late at night. And this is no accident. Rather, it's a result of TikTok intentionally designing its platform to keep our young people glued to their screens, all in the name of profit. That platform has employed things like constant push notifications at all hours of the day and night that prod users to open the app using the same addictive reward system that slot machines deploy. Infinite scroll, where users can endlessly look through their feed to see new videos, causing them to stay on the app for longer than they otherwise would. Autoplay, which shows users videos without the user choosing to watch. Features that induce a feeling of FOMO, or fear of missing out, so that young users stay on the app to avoid missing out on something that helps them on their feed, that happens on their feed. As one TikTok executive acknowledged, this system exploits children's heightened fear of missing out, playing into their natural instinct to respond. As we allege, these intentional features are remarkably effective at overriding a young person's agency and keeping them tied to the platform. But instead of actually addressing these harms, TikTok lulled parents into believing that so-called safety features would protect teen users. TikTok advertised that teen accounts automatically have a daily screen limit of 60 minutes, but the limit is not a limit at all. It's just a pop-up prompt that users can actually bypass. And beyond the prompt, they can use the platform for an unlimited amount of time. In China, meanwhile, TikTok's sister platform has much stricter safety restrictions, including limiting some minors to 40 minutes, and that's 40 minutes of use per day, and limiting the platform's availability to certain hours. Now, we all know that addictive social media use has consequences on young people's mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Such excessive time impacts sleep and school performance. It can lead to negative impacts on young people's brain development and self-esteem. It can dominate a young person's time, stopping them from participating in healthy and enriching off-screen activities. TikTok claims that youth well-being is its top priority, but that is simply false. Let's take the beauty filters as an example. That platform provides users with filters and effects that can be used to dramatically alter one's appearance and foster unrealistic beauty standards. This is particularly harmful to the platform's users, especially young girls. As we allege in our complaint, TikTok knew this too. Records show that the company knew these filters caused harm to young people, but deliberately chose to keep them because they knew their removal would decrease a user's time on the platform. This case is not about regulating the content that is shown to TikTok users. It's about TikTok's own bad conduct.
All right, listening to one of 14 state attorneys general who are participating in a lawsuit against TikTok, saying TikTok is literally knocking on the minds of young people in that state and other states. They want TikTok to have stronger regulations. By the way, TikTok responded just a short time ago. They say they have already done a lot of work in eliminating accounts that are thought to belong to minors. But you heard what that state attorney general had to say, that 150% of TikTok accounts in Massachusetts represent the population of Massachusetts, of the youth population of Massachusetts. And that's because a lot of those kids have 2 or more accounts. We'll be watching this one closely because we know it speaks to so many people using TikTok in the palm of their hands. All right, look at this. Our video monitors take us out west to a bone-dry San Diego, and yet another California wildfire making the news. This right here is a brush fire. It's causing evacuations in an area near San Diego called Campo. There are injuries to report among the evacuees here as this fire laps its way, chewing up that hillside and leaving smoke behind, choking smoke. Firefighters say, and perhaps the hillside is the reason why, it's only 25% contained. Jess, it just seems like we've got hurricanes in one part of the country and then hot and dry as a bone in this part of the country.
Yeah, luckily it's starting to become a little bit more mild on the West Coast when it comes to that extreme heat we experienced just last week. But of course, the other big weather story for us has to do with a hurricane right around the corner as we head into the coming days. We're already starting to see light showers come on shore from the Gulf from this system alone, and the National Weather Service has issued tropical storm warnings, hurricane warnings, storm surge warnings, and flood warnings for the state of Florida as we gear up for what could be one of the worst storms that Tampa Bay has seen in over 100 years. That means the community members down there haven't seen a storm like this in their whole lifetime. So as they're gearing up and evacuating, we continue to keep a close eye on those communities. Today, taking a look behind me, I want to show you where that storm is currently at, as many people are evacuating today. By tomorrow, it's going to be too late. The storm's going to get way too close, and those roads are going to already have a lot of flooding issues. Here's Hurricane Milton right now, just 80 miles north of the Yucatan Peninsula, sitting around 150 miles per hour. Yesterday was a Category 5. It only takes 157 mile per hour winds for it to turn into a Category 5, so it's at a 4 right now. It's expected to hit as a 3 as it makes its way closer to Tampa Bay as we head into the coming days. Moving just to the east around 9 miles per hour. Here's the strength of that storm starting to decay just ahead of landfall as we head into the overnight hours Wednesday night, heading into Thursday morning. Now this storm will continue to sweep over Orlando, back out into the shore coast of Daytona Beach, all throughout that coastline as we head into the early morning hours on Thursday, and then it's not going to cause any more impact after that point. However, we are keeping a very close eye on a lot of things. Freshwater flooding in the central part of Florida. We're also keeping a close eye on storm surge. Anywhere up to around 12 feet is expected along the Tampa Bay shoreline, stretching down into Fort Myers, Boca Grande area too. Now we continue to watch this eye move its way in. We're also dealing with damaging winds anywhere up to around 125 miles per hour as it moves over the state of Florida, over Orlando, and back out as we head into Thursday afternoon. This will turn into a very fast storm once it actually hits landfall into those overnight hours. It'll be pitch black as it sweeps throughout those communities. Hopefully, people are taking it seriously when it comes to those evacuation orders just along that shoreline. When you're talking about 12 foot, when you're talking about record-breaking storm surge, over a story high when it comes to that water coming in from offshore, this is something that caused so much devastation, death among those community members if they do live along those shorelines, and you don't want to be sitting around during a time like this. You want to be evacuating today as we head over into our coastline, over into Daytona Beach, stretching down into communities like Edgewater. Of course, they're also dealing with storm surge too, just on the opposite side of Florida's peninsula. So there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this, but today is the day to evacuate. Like I said, the National Weather Service even comments on this too. Tomorrow it's going to be too late.
Wow. And what is really another layer to this horrible situation is the fact that the population is literally being pushed up into Orlando. And as we learned from our correspondent just a minute ago, those communities will be hit, but they're also hit with a huge influx in their population. So much to watch. We'll be watching your reports, Jess. Hey, when we come back, we're going to continue the conversation about Hurricane Milton as it barrels there towards Florida. A lot of people bracing for impact. And our CBS News teams are there in your communities. If you're watching right now, streaming or in the palm of your hand or at home, not evacuating, our teams are there to get you the news you need to keep you safe and alive. We're back after the break. Okay, so we're watching our video monitors from Florida where a monster hurricane has tens of thousands of people on the run. Maybe somebody you know right now. People in at least 9 counties are under mandatory evacuation orders. They want to get out, but there's also news breaking that Tampa's airport has just suspended operations. Also over in St. Petersburg, we're learning about a small plane crash involving 4 family of 4, their dog on board. They were trying to evacuate Florida ahead of Hurricane Milton. Police say those passengers were rescued. They were pulled out of the water, 3 treated for minor injuries. We'll try to get an update from that area as soon as we can. Meanwhile, Milton's path is expected to bring life-threatening conditions to parts of Florida by tomorrow. Look at this. Parts of Florida are seeing this in the palm of their hand, and they are knowing there's a monster out there. Milton arriving, think about this, less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene hit the same Florida coastline. In that case, 230 people lost their lives. So, in response, President Joe Biden has canceled his international trips to Germany and Africa. He's going to stay at the White House to monitor that hurricane response. In fact, we just got this. This is what he had to say a little bit earlier.
This could be the worst storm to hit Florida in over a century. And God willing, it won't be, but that's what it's looking like right now. Immediately approved the pre-landfall emergency declarations in Florida. It's the second one in a week, the second time in a week, and there have been two before that, by the way. I sent FEMA Administrator Criswell down to Florida yesterday to work intensively with the state and local partners as we prepare to deploy more resources. She's going to continue that work between Florida and North Carolina in the coming days. I'm calling on the airlines and other companies to provide as much service as possible to accommodate evacuations and not to engage in price gouging. Most importantly, I've urged everyone currently located in Hurricane Milton's path to listen to local officials and follow safety instructions. You all have been reporting on the highways, shoulders being opened, everybody's heading out. And if you're under evacuation orders, you should evacuate now. You should have already evacuated. It's a matter of life and death, and that's not hyperbole. It's a matter of life and death. So let me add that FEMA has provided 300 ambulances to move people who can't move themselves out of healthcare facilities. And while we prepare for Hurricane Milton, we're still surging resources in North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Tennessee to respond to Hurricane Helene. And it's real. The impact is still there. And we're going to leave, we're not going to leave until the job is done.
So the president saying not going to leave till the job is done. Let's talk about the job and the people who will be doing that job. This is astounding. These are beds set up for emergency workers inside a stadium in St. Petersburg. That's added to a base camp for 10,000 emergency responders set up at Tropicana Field, the home of the Tampa Bay Rays. You can see every one of those beds will equal a first responder who is there trying to save lives and preserve life. CBS News 24/7, the place to be, streaming in the palm of your hand, especially for those of you who are in the evacuation zones and seeing that Hurricane Milton spinning your way. CBS News correspondent Nicole Valdez reports from Fort Myers on how a lot of people are preparing for what is going to be imminent and very deep flooding.
Well, Reed, Southwest Florida sadly knows what these hurricanes can do. I mean, just look at less than 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Helene. It left parts of downtown Fort Myers under several inches of water. So no one wants to see that happen again. They're not taking any chances. Not only are they boarding up, they're piling on the sandbags, but they're actually using spray foam to essentially fill in all the gaps to prevent as much water from getting inside these businesses as possible. We know that the storm surge remains really the main concern with this storm. Hurricane Milton could bring anywhere from 10 to 15 feet of storm surge to parts of Florida's Gulf Coast if it stays on track. That's the concern. Thankfully, there have been a lot of people taking this seriously, a lot of communities under those mandatory evacuation orders, and we've seen a lot of people taking advantage of the time and getting out now. It's something that the sheriff's office has really been pushing for the last 24 hours at least, essentially begging people to leave areas like downtown Fort Myers and the islands, Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, telling them, hey, once winds reach 45 miles per hour, we're taking our deputies off the streets. If you need help, no one's coming until after the storm passes. It's a sobering message, but one that they want to make clear to people, hoping that they will heed those warnings and get out long before we start to feel the impacts of Hurricane Milton. Reed?
All near boarded up windows there. Thank you so much. We want you to think about something else. There are other concerns about potential impacts of Milton and Helene. North Carolina. Think about this. They're a battleground state. We're only weeks away from Election Day. So elections leaders there are changing some of their voting rules, saying it's to make sure that nobody is denied the right to vote. More than 1 million registered voters live in disaster areas. Look at this area highlighted there in North Carolina. 13 counties. And right there, there's accessibility problems at voting sites. Postal services are still severely disrupted. Here's Karen Bell.
Many of these communities will be without power, without water, without internet, without cell service, potentially for weeks. Some may even be facing months. And so our job is to figure out, as long as there are citizens in those communities, how do we provide them with voting opportunities so that they can exercise their right to vote? And we will make workarounds with the facilities, with the power supply, and so forth to do that job.
So what are they doing? The state election board changed those election rules to help voters who are impacted. Early voting hours will be extended, and Election officials will be on hand at disaster shelters to assist with absentee voting. People literally voting from shelters. Our video monitors take us to President Joe Biden arriving in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He's there to tout his administration's efforts to replace a major problem in the United States. We're talking about infrastructure as it relates to lead pipes underground. The president making this stop in a crucial voter state for Kamala Harris, with another stop later in the day in another key state of Pennsylvania. So you see the president right there getting off of Air Force One, shaking the hands of servants of our country in the midst of what we are facing by way of just being plagued by hurricanes in the United States. But he's not talking about what is happening above ground. He is doing a victory lap, so to speak, talking about what is happening relative to the infrastructure underneath the soil in the form of aging pipes, lead pipes that need to come out. Much more ahead on what President Biden has to say in Wisconsin before he heads off to Pennsylvania a little bit later on the stream. Hey, our video feeds have an eye on the U.S. State Department and a news conference addressing matters in the Middle East and the work to negotiate a potential ceasefire. Where would that ceasefire be? Take a listen.
A few things about that. So first of all, I did see these reports that Hezbollah now wants a ceasefire. And
delinked from Gaza.
Yeah, delinked from Gaza, that they just want a ceasefire on its own terms. And I think my initial response to this is, where have they been for a year? For a year, the world has been calling on Hezbollah to stop the attacks across the border into Israel. And for a year, Hezbollah said they would not do it unless there was a ceasefire in Gaza. They linked the two when the international community was saying, stop the fighting. And Israel was saying, if Hezbollah stopped attacks across the border, Israel would stop its attacks in response against Hezbollah. So for a year, you had the world calling for this ceasefire. You had Hezbollah refusing to agree to one. And now that Hezbollah is on the back foot and is getting battered, suddenly they've changed their tune and want a ceasefire. I think it's not surprising given the situation they find themselves in. We continue to ultimately want a diplomatic solution to this conflict. But as you've heard me say for the past several days, Hezbollah's forces in southern Lebanon refuse to fully implement United Nations Security Council 1701. Under the terms of that resolution, Hezbollah was supposed to put down its arms and it was supposed to withdraw beyond the Litani River. And over the 18 years since that resolution was implemented, they refused to do either of those things. In fact, not only did they refuse to do them, they increased their arms just over the border from Lebanon, and they increased the number of forces just over the border from Israel, not over the border from Lebanon, obviously. So we support Israel's efforts to degrade Hezbollah's capability, but yes, ultimately we do want to see a diplomatic resolution to this conflict. We believe that is ultimately the only resolution that will provide real, lasting security to both the Israeli and Lebanese people.
So, I mean, correct me if I understand you wrong. What you are saying is, yes, we are ultimately want a diplomatic solution to stop this war, but it's not yet now. We want to give a window for Israel to attack Hezbollah more.
I think there is a question. So I think there is a real question of trust isn't even the right word. I was going to say, so it's trust, but obviously we don't trust Hezbollah. But you look at what Hezbollah said in 2006 when 1701 was adopted by the UN Security Council, and Hezbollah said that they would implement 1701. And they blew through all of their commitments. And so there is an obvious lack of faith in Hezbollah's ability to do what it said in 2006 and do what it's saying it would do now, which is agree to an actual ceasefire that would allow Israeli civilians to return home and allow Lebanese civilians to return home. So the answer to your question is yes, we do support Israel launching these incursions to degrade Hezbollah's infrastructure, so ultimately we can get a diplomatic resolution that allows 1701 to finally be fully implemented.
Netanyahu also today spoke directly to the Lebanese people as pleading with them to take this opportunity to take their country back. I'm quoting here. And some inside Lebanon are afraid of this conflict to spill into another civil war in Lebanon. Do you see that maybe this kind of rhetoric from Israel is pushing Lebanon toward more inner fighting other than? fighting this out?
So I'm not going to comment on the Prime Minister's statement. I will just state our position when it comes to Lebanon. What we want to see come out of this situation ultimately is Lebanon able to break the grip that Hezbollah has had on the country. More than a grip, break the stranglehold that Hezbollah has had on the country. And remove Hezbollah's veto over a president, which has kept the country in a political stalemate for 2 years and kept it from moving forward in electing a president. And remove Hezbollah's ability to block the state from being the sole entity that can exercise force in southern Lebanon, because that's ultimately what has kept 1701 from being implemented, is that UNIFIL and the LAF can't properly do their job because Hezbollah won't move back and won't disarm. So that is the ultimate outcome that we want to see from this conflict. And obviously we do not want to see any kind of instability inside Lebanon. And I think the premise of your question, it's not the premise of your question, but one of the possible outcomes of your question would be because Hezbollah decides to resist pulling back and resist the Lebanese armed forces and UNIFIL doing the job that they're supposed to do under 1701.
My last question, a simple
sure.
one. I asked you before, but I had to.
You are listening to the State Department's Matthew Miller answering questions on negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah amid increased attacks. Let's think about this. Hezbollah reportedly calling for a ceasefire. They've tied a ceasefire to what's going on in Lebanon, to what's also going on over in Hamas territory in Gaza. That tie now appears to be weakened because of Israel's recent attacks taking out many leaders of Hezbollah. But this call for ceasefire comes at a time when we should note that today it's reported that more than 100 rockets have been fired from Lebanon by Hezbollah towards Israel, one hitting Haifa for the first time in years, Haifa actually taking a hit. We'll continue watching this, but that is what's going on at the U.S. State Department right now as the tensions in the Middle East continue to be at a boil. When we come back, the battle of the sexes at the polls, which gender powers U.S. elections, and how that reality drives the narrative by candidates who want to win the White House. That's coming up. Welcome back. Let's talk about a highly coveted voter bloc for whoever wants to win the White House: women. Historically, women turn out for elections in higher numbers than men. So that's why you're hearing a lot about those kitchen table issues and reproductive rights on the campaign trail. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand in Virginia now with a close-up look at the work to woo women.
Behind the scenes of Campaign 2024, a grassroots groundswell of volunteers.
Ladies, let's make the history.
Particularly women working to turn out the vote for the candidate of their choice.
I feel like we're kind of the secret army that gets things done.
That includes postcard writing parties like this Northern Virginia gathering in support of Vice President Kamala Harris.
What kind of difference do you think an event like this can make?
Every postcard makes a difference. Every door knock, just talking to somebody makes a difference.
Women for Harris organizers Amanda Linton and Nancy Fatemi are honing in on the battleground states.
We're all gas, no brakes.
I think we're the winning difference for Kamala Harris.
In Richmond, Virginia, the Republican women's group Rally Virginia is organizing for former President Donald Trump.
It is going to be the largest all women's rally in North America this year.
Founder Ruse Dadaboy says part of the group's work is trying to bring suburban women back to the GOP.
If we can talk to the independent-minded women, then we're doing our job.
While polls show Harris holding a lead with women voters, Trump supporters are talking up the former president's policies.
Sometimes it's a bitter pill to swallow, but I tell you, I've been able to just separate the person and his personality traits from his policies.
Your top issues, Tina?
My top issues are the economy and safety. And I think they're very closely tied together.
On the other side,
very important for me that we protect our democracy.
We're not going to sit back and watch our children and our grandchildren have fewer rights than we had.
While these two groups of women are working for different outcomes, they share the same dedication, whether by pen or phone, in the run-up to Election Day. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Virginia.
Natalie Brand reporting there. And by the way, hello to Natalie's mom, who watches CBS News 24/7. By the way, the Center for American Women in Politics says in every presidential election since 1980, the proportion of eligible women who voted exceeded that of men. Well, picture of an approaching tragedy. Less than 2 weeks after Hurricane Helene tore up parts of Florida, and now the clock is ticking to clean that debris up, because everything you see right there, that debris could turn into projectiles on wind as now Hurricane Milton approaches. And look at this video to our monitors taking us to the Tampa Bay area, where zoo staff rushed to protect animals by stocking up on food and supplies, making sure that trees are trimmed and generators have enough fuel. Can't move an elephant from a hurricane. Here's Zoo Director Tiffany Burns.
So moving animals, making sure they're in secure locations. We do have a lot of what we call night houses, or buildings that the animals are used to going into. For animals that don't have those night houses, like some of our aviaries, we do move those animals into secure buildings so that our animals are nice and secure and ready for the storm.
Ready for the storm, even the animals there, and we wish them well as well. Jess, you're watching what's going on as this thing barrels towards Florida.
I am, and I just watched the hurricane hunters give an update of where they're at right now over that hurricane. It's a bumpy ride for them as they're collecting data of what's to come with this storm. Now, I want to start off with what's happening for our friends over in Florida. Heading into the coming days, of course, that hurricane is expected to hit around a Category 3 into the Tampa Bay area. That could still go 50 miles north or south, but as we watch this storm get closer, the National Weather Service has issued tropical storm warnings, hurricane warnings, storm surge warnings, and flood warnings for the whole state of Florida as we gear up for what could be one of the worst storms Tampa Bay has seen in over 100 years. And here's where it's at right now, just 80 miles north of the Yucatan Peninsula. This is starting to really gain some strength. Now at 155 miles per hour. It takes 157 mile per hour winds to turn this back into a Category 5 hurricane. This is an update within the past hour. Now we're starting to see a little bit more strength as it continues to move to the northeast around 8 miles per hour. Right now it's at a Category 4. It's expected to hit into the overnight hours on Wednesday. We're going to continue to keep a close eye on this and track this storm as it gets closer to millions of people as they're gearing up and evacuating this afternoon. Reed.
We know you've got us covered, Jess. Thank you. Let's jump the map for a moment to Missouri in a case getting national attention. The man accused of shooting a teenager in court again today. There he is. Today's issue, whether that triggerman, Andrew Lester, needs a mental evaluation. His attorney believes his client is not fit to stand trial. Lester pleaded not guilty to first-degree assault and armed criminal action in the shooting of 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, who survived that shooting. We are also watching court cases out of the western United States, and we're jumping the map to San Francisco, California, and the murder case of Cash App founder Bob Lee. The man accused in the killing is named Nima Momani. There he is in court right there. His attorneys filed a motion to stop Lee's ex-wife from sitting in and listening to courtroom testimony. Their reason? Potential witness tampering, after a judge suggested an order to stop the ex-wife from speaking to anybody related to the trial until the trial's over. We are watching because jury selection begins next Tuesday. Another day of negotiations between Boeing and its largest union trying to end a weeks-long strike. Contract talks began yesterday, and although they had been talking all day, the union representing these striking workers, some 33,000 on the West Coast factory area alone, say barely any movement. Well, there's movement of a different sort here on CBS News 24/7. We are watching President Joe Biden go into the battleground state of Wisconsin. You can see right there the big sign, what he's going to be talking about, replacing lead pipes. It's been a part of his talk relative to infrastructure in these United States. The president will be taking to the podium. You'll be able to see his words a little bit later on CBS News 24/7. Thanks for watching.